Welcome to another game cast by Gwyn and Rohans. This is again a cast with our partnership with LzRuha Gaming. We have joined up with them to cast games, and to kick that off, we're casting replay packs by some of their top players. This is LzHFantaSy here, a great player from StarCraft 1 Brood War against ThisIsJimmy, a Terran player of some renown. So we're going to see this TvT here on Metalopolis. Go ahead and talk a little bit about the TvT matchup for us, Rohans.
TvT's probably one of the cooler of the mirror matches. There's a lot of things that work. It's not as one-dimensional as the last game we casted, which was Protoss versus Protoss. What seems to be going around, especially in the GSL and these big tournaments, is pretty much Marines, tanks, Vikings, and medbacks. The Marines are pretty mobile, so you can see some nice drops sometimes and do some good harassment. There are some builds, however, where there's fast expands and kind of like 4 to 5 racks, Marauder Marine pushes, so we may be seeing some of that. This is Metalopolis, and they are on cross positions, so don't know.
Certainly. I mean, some of that early aggression is very possible, as Marauders kind of negate that tank count, as you can just kind of stim, run up, kill the tanks. Early in the beta and in history of the game, we saw a lot of kind of interesting play where we would see players go ahead and just have this Viking war of who could get the most Vikings, and then we saw some brilliant players actually just ignore that completely and make nothing but Marauders. So it's definitely a matchup with a lot of viable openings. Like you said, I'm particularly a fan myself of Banshee openings in this matchup. Being able to get that Banshee out, establish map control, and then expand behind it. So I'm curious to see what our players will be doing at the moment, just kind of scouting around.
Yeah, we do have orbitals going down for both players, and as you mentioned, there's so many weird openings. Not weird, but there's a lot of things you can do as a Terran user. You can Terran v Terran. We see a lot of Banshee play as well. I forgot to mention that. Very popular. You can get cloak Banshees, try to pick off SCVs, and put yourself in an economic position in a mirror match is always a good thing.
You certainly can, and it looks like scouting will be denied for ThisIsJimmy. So Fantasy gonna be able to do whatever he wants behind that, curtain of a Marine. Looks like throwing down a factory as soon as he had the gas to do so. Getting more supply depots, still on 1 gas for both players. We do see a factory on the way, a little bit of a scouting barracks out there. I'm surprised we didn't see Marine production from that barracks the whole time. But a second gas going down now for both players. So still seeing pretty similar builds. Looks like we are going to have just a Marine or 2 more out for Fantasy because he did continue constant production of those.
Yeah, and Jimmy does have a slight lead on the factory. Both players are actually going for factory, and Jimmy actually just throws in a starport as well. So I would imagine, yep, Tech Lab going down. We're probably going to see some Banshees coming from Jimmy. Solid opening in Terran v Terran. Like I mentioned, you try to pick off some SCVs. You just got to be careful not to lose your Banshees because they're so expensive of an investment.
Certainly, and it looks like we're going to see Banshees out of both players just a tiny bit faster out of ThisIsJimmy. Did cut a few Marines there, get that factory up a little bit sooner, and immediately, lifting off, landing that factory somewhere else. Going to give that Tech Lab to, of course, to that starport, and ThisIsJimmy already gearing up to start that Banshee production.
Yeah, and he's still blind. He tried to just sneak another SCV in, so it wouldn't shock me if Jimmy laid down a scan here very soon, because he really has no idea what Fantasy's up to behind the wall of Marines at his choke.
But we do see, Banshee out for both players, and an engineering bay going down for Fantasy. This is such smart play. I love this. Getting the Banshee for map control, saying, you know what, that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and get my engineering bay, probably get an upgrade or 2 before his opponent, and skip on Cloak. I love this play.
Yeah, that's really smart. And just in case, and the scan actually does go down, so Jimmy is going to be aware the Banshee's come down. But as I mentioned, we already have a turret going down for Fantasy, which is just smart play. You don't want him to be surprised by a Banshee and, be in that position where he could be the one losing these SCVs since both players are going for him.
And we do see, now ThisIsJimmy has to respond, getting a Raven and an engineering bay. Of course, his engineering bay, much behind. The turret over here for Fantasy already finished. Banshees en route, gonna kind of avoid each other in the middle of the map. It would have been quite funny if they had bumped into each other.
Yes, definitely.
Looks like some good micro there from Fantasy, finishing off that Marine at the watchtower. But a welcome party of Marines sitting there. You know, a little bit of nice micro. You can do a little bit of damage as Banshees do outrange Marines.
Yeah, he's poking in really well, controlling that Banshee, only taking a little bit of damage. He's probably going to get about maybe 2 to 3 kills, and I would imagine he would retreat. Jimmy, meanwhile, his Banshee, I don't know if he's just waiting for... I thought he was researching Cloak. He actually canceled it. So we do have Jimmy's Banshee really not doing anything. I'm not sure if he's just trying to deny this expansion. He does get 1 SCV there, but Marines are coming out to meet this.
Looks like he did deny the expansion for a little bit, but you know, we do see a command center going down in the main. You know, this is Jimmy dropped his on the low ground, and both players going ahead and getting siege mode and starting that typical Marine tank business that we see so often.
Yeah, you know, it's cool too because he's already got all his tech, and all he has to do is get a medvac out there, and all of a sudden you have some viable harassment to go along with your Banshees. So drop a couple Marines in a medvac, catch an army out of position, and all of a sudden the game is in your favor. Certainly,
and we do see you know, this Raven out for This Is Jimmy. I'm actually, you know, a pretty big fan of Ravens in a lot of matchups. This is one I'm not so sure that it's going to come out too usefully unless he gets that Seeker Missile. Great for taking out clumps of Marines, of course.
Yeah, I mean, unless there's a Viking war, it's really not going to help him. If there was Marauders on the map going, like, you know, trying to pick off tanks, it would help there. But as you mentioned, in a straight up Marine tank fight, it's going to be pretty much useless.
And scouting SCV from Fantasy goes ahead, sees the tank, sees siege mode, has to know that there's Marines there as well. Did not see the Viking though, so you know, right now This Is Jimmy is winning the air war with that 1 Viking he has out. Viking, of course, going to nullify Banshees on the field, as well as nullifying sight for tanks, which is a huge deal in this matchup. For those of you who do not know, tanks can shoot farther than they can see, and so it's very common for Terran players to use an air unit to give their tanks sight, so that the tanks can shoot their full range. And this kind of sparked that, you know, air war earlier in the game's development, where you just have, you know, 3 tanks and 100 Vikings, and whoever had the 100 Vikings would win because their tanks could see farther than your tanks.
That's correct. How much the game has changed in this matchup since then. I have seen some games still kind of play that style, just not successfully. This is really where it's at, I believe, in Terran v Terran. This heavy Marine play. They're much more mobile than Tank Viking, and you know, if you go Tank Viking, your opponent can just take as many bases as he wants because you're so immobile.
I certainly agree. And looking at This Is Jimmy, it looks like he is going to go for a drop with that medevac. He's loaded 8 Marines up and taking the long way around, you know, probably going for that mineral line. I would have loved to see, you know, kind of a maybe some Banshee play at the expansion, picking on that extractor at the same time this drop goes on. But the drop coming down, looks like he's targeting the tech lab. A very smart move there to target that. And Stimming running into the mineral line. Going to do some economic damage here. The tank immediately sieges, of course.
Yeah, nice little drop. He did actually not finish off that tech lab, which is unfortunate. Medvac was picked off, so these Marines are going to be sitting ducks. It's only a matter of time. Stim, he's trying to take out a Banshee, nearly gets it. That was actually really close. But Banshee does survive, Viking does survive. Both injured, but they do make it through the battle. I would have liked to see him maybe just focus on that tech lab. Those do take some time to build, not as long as reactors, but they do take some time to build, and that slows down the tank count. You always want to get ahead in the tank count in this matchup.
Certainly. And, you know, seeing looks like a lot more barracks go down from Fantasy. This is Jimmy going for the same style, you know, that heavy Marine count with all those reactors. You know, so it looks like we are going to see that more mobile, you know, Marine heavy, light in the tank, you know, style from both players. Taking a third now, it looks like, you know, Fantasy taking a slightly earlier third than his opponent as he pushes. And this, again, I mean, such smart play here by Fantasy, taking an expansion while he pushes. That takes, you know, his opponent's focus off the expansion, and opponent has to defend, cannot really put any pressure on that expand.
Definitely, and as you mentioned earlier, winning the air battle. He's got a couple Banshees along with some. We do have an engagement here, and Marines are stim pushing in. I just don't think it's going to be enough. He has to